Now we're going to be taking a look at the 6 different lights that we have available to illuminate our view scenes. So let's go ahead and take a look at those right now. If we go over where the ventilator is and just one button up, we can right mouse click on that and it'll give us our 6 different lights that we have. We have a point light, a quadratic point light, spotlight, quadratic spotlight, directional light, and light panel. And I'm going to go ahead and load all these into our scene right now so we can take a look at the differences between these objects and these lights. And we're just loading them in order, and I'm just going to line them up, and that way we can see just a little bit easier how these lights are affecting our scene and what we can do with them. Okay, we have all of our lights loaded into our scene, and I'm going to go ahead and select all of these within our layer panel. If we hold down Shift, and if we have our bottom selected, hold down Shift, select the sunlight, which is the top one, and go ahead and move that up. Now, of course, with our sunlight, we actually already have a directional light in the scene, because all the directional light is actually the sun. So I can actually delete that directional light that we added in there because we have our sunlight, and that's pretty easy to figure out how that works. Our sunlight, we have our color and then our softness, and our softness is dependent on our shadows for our objects that are going to be in the way of that light. So if I go ahead and add a sphere to our scene, just zoom out a little so we can see it. And we want to take a look at the shadow for this object. So we need to find where its shadow is at. I'm just going to zoom in here, and now we can see its shadow. And I'm going to select our sunlight once again and up our softness. And as we increase our softness, you can see it's very blurred within this preview, but I'm going to right mouse click, go to preview quality, and change it to best, which we can see a little bit better of an effect now for that shadow. And of course, the higher our render settings overall, the better this effect is going to look. So when we're in our render globals and our render options, we want to make sure that we have a very good setting on. There's a lot of things that affect our shadow options for our softness, and advanced effects quality is one of them. So you want to make sure that this is at a decent level when you are actually rendering your scene using the softness, because lower quality will produce this grainy effect that we see right now. Even though our options are set to the best, it will still not look as good because it is just a preview. It won't look as good as the actual render. So some of our lights have that softness option on them, which affects our shadows. And I'm going to go ahead and delete this sphere, and we are going to double click to see all of our views, making sure we're double clicking that main camera view, and then I'm going to go ahead and frame all. And that way we can see all of our objects, and if I select our lights again and select that frame all option, it will frame selected. Okay, so we'll come back over here, and we want to take a look at these lights a little bit closer. And as you can see, we actually have two versions of two different types of lights, the point light and then the quadratic point light. Now, pretty much the differences between those are its fall off. I'm going to bring this back up to full view, and I just want to spread these lights out just a little bit. Grab these other ones and move them out of the way. So we're just looking at the point lights, and more specifically what they're doing to the ground plane. And we can see majorly one orb right here, but I'm going to go ahead and separate these just a little bit more. You can see we have a very, very light area for our quadratic light, our quadratic point light, and then our regular point light shows a little more intensity, and that's because it's based on a fall off. The quadratic point light, or even the spotlight, their fall off is a little bit quicker. So in other words, they're not as bright, and they produce more of a softer effect. And we can see we have a couple of different options for this. We can change its color, its softness, just like we can with all of our lights, and then its power. And the power is just the intensity of our light. And as we increase our power, we can see these guidelines that are showing up in our camera view, and they get a little bit larger so we can get a better idea on the overall area and how much it's really affecting. And we can do this for all of our lights, changing the power. And like I said too, we can also change the color. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to more of a reddish color, and we'll see that on the ground for our first point light. Now let's go over and take a look at some of our other lights. Our other two lights that we have right here are our spotlights. We have a regular spotlight, and then we have our quadratic spotlight. And you can see we have the same sort of effect on the ground caused by these lights as we do with the point light. And that is pretty much the intensity is not as much because the fall off is much more. But we also have a few more options up at the top. You can see we also have a new option, which is spread, which allows us to change the cone angle of our light and make it just a little bit larger. And then we can also adjust its fall off, which is that sort of gradient that we see from the inside of this ring to the outer ring. And we can go ahead and increase that fall off, and we see a much softer area between here. Because what it's going to do is create a gradient where we have the brightest part in the center, in our inner ring, and then the outer ring is going to be our end of our gradient, which is going to be the dark area that we can't see. Same thing for our regular spotlight. We also have the spread and our fall off. And then we can even adjust the power on these as well, just as we adjust on our other lights. And the last light we're going to be taking a look at is our light panel. And what this allows us to do is to represent a different form of light. In other words, we can sort of fake radiosity with this effect, almost have light bouncing off a wall. We can also manipulate this object and create different shapes. So we could do different types of lighting. We could maybe have a strip light, where we can see this little line right here, just casting all this little light. So we could do more fluorescence that way. There's just a lot of different options we could do with this light panel, depending on how you manipulate it and where, of course, you position it, because it will produce different types of effects depending on its size and, of course, its position. And for the light panel, we only have two options. We have color and power. And now I'm going to go ahead and just delete our light panel and all of our other lights. So we sort of have a fresh scene here. And we're going to be taking a look at the lighting options, which is an overall light panel interface for all of our lights. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a point light. And now we're going to double click on it, which is going to pull up our light editor. And we have the ability to edit lens flares if we want to add lens flares to our light. And we can add light gels if we want to, meaning that we could put a picture on here and project different images. Or there's also textures we could project. And we also have our volumetric settings, which allow us to create sort of a misty fog-like lighting effect. And we could cast shadows within this volume, and then of course show smoke and dust in the light beam so it looks a little bit better. As you can see with our preview render, it's actually quite large right now because our volumetric effect is very large. I'm going to zoom out just a bit, and we're going to double click on this light once again to bring up our light panel, our light editor. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off the lens flare right now so we can just look at those volumetric settings. And I need to turn down our intensity so that it's not so bright and we can see just a little bit better preview. As you can see, we do have a little bit of a fall off now, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom back very far so we can really see this volumetric light. And now you can see we have this whole area. We can see our smoke and dust within that volumetric light. And then we also have all these different settings that we can change for this light. We can create a custom function. We can edit a filter for the smoke and dust. We can decrease our intensity, increase our intensity, also increase the quality of our volumetrics. And now let's go over to our next tab, which is shadows. And now we can enable shadows for all of our lights. We can use shadow maps if we want to, which is a different way of calculating our shadows, and it may render a little bit faster. We're not going to go too far in depth into that. So then we're going to go into the lighting tab now, and we can see that the light attenuation we have filters for, so we can do extra changes that way. We can also change our lights if we've created a regular point light, in this case we have, and we want to turn this into a quadratic spotlight or point light. We can go ahead and click on that, and now our light attenuation works just like a quadratic spotlight and not like a normal one. So we can go ahead and change that afterwards if you position your camera and you don't want to make any changes to it. We can also do a custom light attenuation by actually editing this filter. So then we can edit the filter, maybe add a curve in there, and now it'll produce a little bit different type of effect. And now we're going to take a look at our influence. Now what influence allows us to do is specifically select which objects we would like to be affected by that light, or any of the lights in our scene. So we can go in here, and I have the ground right now, so I can select all objects influenced by light except the ones marked below. So I can select ground. And now what's going to happen is our ground is not going to be affected by this point light, and we can see that it has no effect on our ground anymore. And a lot of these options are available up in the upper right here for our panel. We can see if we have our lens flare editor, our gel editor, volumetrics, and then the casting shadows. But all of that is also accessible within that light editor, which is very, very helpful.